church, her saints proclaiming Jesus Christ was born to save. God of every generation, reaching out to all mankind. How relentless His pursuing as He draws us to His light. Be seated. For Mark chapter 8, verses 34 through 37. It's on the back of your bulletin if you'd like to follow along. He called the crowd with His disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life?" The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. We hear a familiar passage tonight. Jesus calling His disciples and saying to them, "If anyone wants to become my follower, they must take up their cross and follow me." We've heard it ever since we became Christians. If you grew up in the church, you've heard it all your life. Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. But what does it mean? Well, before we explain and examine and explore what it actually means, I think it's important to note two things about Jesus. First of all, there is the startling honesty of Jesus. Following Jesus is not easy, and Jesus never ever sought to trick people into it. We were talking about the cable company. They are very good at making it sound cheap and easy, even when it's not. And their goal is to somehow lure you into signing up for another 2 years at a very, very reasonable price, and it'll just go up every month, $20. You know how it is. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus was honest. Jesus said, this is not an easy life. Jesus said, if you're looking for an easy life, go somewhere else, because this ain't going to be it. In the early days of World War II, Winston Churchill took over the leadership of England. And he said what he had to offer his people was blood, sweat, and tears. That's what Jesus really offers. If you want to be a disciple of Jesus, Jesus says you will have blood, sweat, and tears. But we also must note that Jesus never calls us to do anything He Himself was not willing to do. When He asks us to face, He has already faced. When He calls us to take up the cross, He Himself would also take up His cross. Now that goes against everything we are taught. It goes against everything we feel, because everything within me says if it's not easy, if it's difficult, if it's painful, get rid of it. Don't follow that. Do something easy. And yet here are the words of Jesus. If anyone would come after me, they must deny themselves, take up thy cross, and follow me. What did He mean? What does it mean to take up your cross? What does the Bible say about cross bearing? Well, first of all, the Bible teaches us that taking up a cross is voluntary. Jesus calls us, Jesus challenges us, but it's our decision. Taking up a cross and following Jesus is not something that anybody can force you to do. And God will not force you to do it. It's your decision. And I'm afraid that we use the phrase bearing my cross totally wrong in our English vernacular. For example, you go to the doctor. The doctor says, I'm sorry to tell you, but you have diabetes and you're going to have to deal with it the rest of your life. And now that's a burden you've got to bear, but it's not a cross, and I have not taken it up for Jesus, so I can't tell others that's my cross to bear. No, you didn't volunteer for it. It's not your cross to bear. Or if a tornado sweeps through our area and destroys my home, I can't call it a cross I have to bear because I didn't volunteer for it. It's not something I choose to do for Jesus. You see, if I talk about bearing a cross, that means I am voluntarily taking it up for Jesus. It means that I am going to enlist. I am going to offer myself in some way to serve Jesus. So what does it mean? Bearing a cross is not an accident that happens to us. It's not something unavoidable we must face. In fact, cross-bearing is an act of love that we choose to do. It's a price we decide to pay because we love Jesus. It means, for Jesus, going to a cross to die because he loved us. For us, it means reaching out to people who are unlovable, who are unlovely, and who may never return the love. And yet we keep on loving them because that's what Jesus calls us to do. If you want a great description of what it means to bear a cross, listen to the words of Paul from 1 Corinthians 13. And just listen to it. And I'm going to read verses 4 and so on. And I'm going to, instead of saying love, I'm going to say cross-bearer, okay? Listen. A cross-bearer is patient. A cross-bearer is kind. A cross-bearer does not envy. A cross-bearer does not boast. A cross-bearer is not arrogant or rude. A cross-bearer is not self-seeking. A cross-bearer is not easily angered, nor keeps records of wrongs, nor delights in evil, but rejoices with the truth. And a cross-bearer always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. That's what it means to bear a cross. That's what Jesus means when he says, if you want to be my disciple, you've got to take up your cross. Dr. Paul Brand tells about his father, who was a missionary to India. For years, this father saw very, very few converts, primarily due to a Hindu priest. A Hindu priest told them that if they listened to the gospel, if they responded, then the evil god would make their cattle die. Sure enough, the cattle of those who became a Christian did die. Not because of God, but because this priest went around poisoning them. And as a result, almost nobody would listen to the gospel. They were afraid. If we listen to the gospel, if we convert, our cattle will die. At times, this missionary doubted his calling. Following the First World War, a terrible flu epidemic took the lives of thousands in India. People lived in isolation. Many died. Dr. Brand's parents cooked a huge vat of soup, took it to those who were infected. Before too long, the wife of that Hindu priest became ill. The Brands lovingly ministered to her. She also died. And then the priest himself, the one that went around poisoning all the cattle, he got sick. The very ones who he had tried to sabotage brought him soup, attended to him. And before he died, he asked that couple to adopt his daughter. This is what he told them. All my life I have served my people, but now that I am hurting, no one comes to help me but Christians. I don't want my daughter to grow up as a Hindu. You see, because of the obvious love, because of the concern shown by Christians, even those who had been persecuted by this person, their witness, their mission in India grew and grew. That's what it means to bear your cross. It means taking the love of God to the ends of the world, to touch the lives of people who are unlovable. It means denying. It means sacrificing. It means paying the price regardless of the hardships that have to be endured. Now, it sounds pretty easy to understand why people have such a hard time with the idea. Whenever the message of the cross has been preached, people have always said, well, wait a minute. I can't do that. That's just too hard. In fact, Jesus talked about going to the cross, and his apostles said, no, Jesus, you need to touch that. In fact, Peter said, I'm never going to let it happen. They tried to keep him from going to Jerusalem. They said, Jesus, we don't want you to die. And when he did die on the cross, they hid behind locked doors. They were fearful of what might happen to them. And a few years later, Paul would write in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, it's on the back of your bulletin too. He writes, for the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to those of us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it's written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified. Look at this. A stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Paul says to the Jews, the cross becomes a stumbling block. That to the Greeks, the cross becomes foolishness. And things haven't changed much. Now we can understand why the Jews thought the cross was a stumbling block and why they stumbled over the cross. Because the Jews had been oppressed just about all through their existence. It first started with the Egyptians. Then the Assyrians came in. Then the Babylonians came in. Then the Greeks came in. When Jesus was living, it was the Romans. But it seemed like the Jews were always being oppressed. And their one hope, their one desire was that a Messiah would come and free them from oppression. The Jews would gather in their families and they would talk about when the Messiah came, how they would be free. Then somebody named Jesus came from a little place called Nazareth. He was a carpenter. He talked about love. He talked about turning the other cheek. That is not what the Jews wanted. The Jews didn't want to love. The Jews wanted to fight. The Jews didn't want to turn the other cheek. The Jews wanted to turn Rome out. And he began to say all these things that was totally against what the Jews want. And then their Messiah died on a cross. So the cross was a stumbling block to the Jews. You see, it wasn't what they expected. It wasn't what they wanted. It was what they needed, though. And when Jesus talks about bearing a cross, it bothers us too. We like to take our easy chair and we like our coffee and we like sitting there. And Jesus comes and says, no, I want you to take up your cross. And we say, well, I've worked real hard this week. I just need some time for myself. I can't today. And Sunday morning comes, and Jesus says, I have a classroom of squirming kids who need to hear the good news about Jesus. But we say, not me, Lord. I don't want to carry that kind of cross. And Jesus puts crosses all around us. Someone says missionaries need money to carry the gospel to the uttermost parts of the world. And once again, we find ourselves wrestling with a cross. And we say, no, I'm not going to support a missionary over in India. There are people in Danville that need help. I don't want to bear that cross. And then someone from Danville wants to reach out. And we say, well, yes, that's fine and good, but they're paying salaries there, and I just don't think that's right. Besides, I live in the county, not the city, so that's not for me to bear that cross either. Over here are the things we want. Over there are the needs of a lost world. And the words of Jesus come back to haunt us. If you want to be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. And that idea was a stumbling block to the Jew, and we keep falling over it too. We're running around, we're busily piecing together our lives, we're trying to build our homes, we're trying to stockpile possessions, but one day it's all going to be gone. It's all going to burn up. It's all going to disappear. It's all going to count for nothing, and the only thing that's going to last is the cross that we chose to bear. That we chose to bear. In the late 4th century, there was a Christian by the name of Telemachus. He decided the only way to protect himself from the corruption of the world and to serve God was becoming a hermit, living in a deserted region. But one day, as he rose from his knees, it dawned on him that if he really wanted to serve God, he had to serve other people too. And that staying in the desert was not what God wanted. Because the cities were full of people that needed help. So he left his little deserted place. He set out for the greatest city in the world at that time, city of Rome. By this time, the terrible persecutions of the first 3 centuries were over. Christianity had won. Christianity was now the official approved religion of the Roman Empire. Even the emperor himself said he was a Christian. Most people did too. At least that's what they claimed. Being a Christian was a politically thing correct to do at that time, especially if you wanted to be in favor with the emperor. And he arrives in Rome right after the Roman general had won a mighty victory over the Goths. So there was the Roman triumph with the processions, the celebrations, and the games at the Colosseum. Now, Rome was a Christian place by now, but one thing still lingered from its past: the bloody games in the Colosseum. Christians were no longer thrown to the lions, but if you were captured in war, you basically had to go down there and you had to fight each other till somebody got killed. And the Romans loved it. They watched, they cheered. It was a national holiday. The gladiators would be fighting. The Christians would be cheering. Well, this man came, and he heard, "Let the games go." And the crowd rushed. And these 2 men were down there fighting and killing each other. And the Christians were standing up applauding. And this one guy who had been a hermit all his life and wanted to serve God, he said, I can't let this happen. He raced through the Colosseum. He went down to where the gladiators were fighting. He urged them to stop, to get out of the way. The commander said, "No, let the games go on." And the gladiator's sword rose and stabbed, and this missionary, this man, this hermit was now dead. Now the crowd was silent. They were shocked that a holy man should be killed in such a way. Quite suddenly, there was the mass realization of what they had done. Historians tell us that the games in Rome ended abruptly that day, never to begin again. Telemachus, by dying, had ended them. One great historian wrote of him, his death was more useful to mankind than his life. By losing his life, he had done more than he ever could by living a lonely life out in the desert. By losing his life, he had the greatest opportunity. We don't offer a luxurious life. We don't offer an easy life. This Ash Wednesday, we come offering a cross. This Ash Wednesday, we come offering death. Have you ever thought about ashes to ashes, dust to dust? From ashes you came, to ashes you will return. Ash Wednesday is about dying. Ash Wednesday is about deciding to take up your cross, to give up everything in order to live. It's easy to see why people step over it, stumble over that cross. Taking up your cross, dying, and then you live? That's what Easter's all about, though. Easter is all about that, because without death, there can be no resurrection. Without crucifixion, you cannot have a resurrection. Without us taking up our cross, we cannot experience the power of Easter. Tonight, I invite you to take up your cross. Tonight, I invite you to deny yourself, to find your cross, and to take it up, even if it means giving up everything. Even if it means giving up everything. Let me say it again. Even if it means giving up everything. Amen. You can remain seated as we sing number 332.